And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana University basketball news and discussion. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Podcast on the Brink is a joint production of the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. For complete coverage of IU basketball, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex Bozich is here, and we are answering your questions. It is a mailbag episode. We put out a call for questions on Monday in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum, and you guys delivered a lot of really good questions. And quick side note, make sure you go to forum.insidethehall.com. Become a member. It is the best ongoing daily Indiana basketball discussion anywhere, so I highly recommend it. But a lot of great topics to talk about. One of my favorite questions is what story about IU hoops people are overlooking now, but that will become one of the top stories of the 2018-19 season. Really had to think about that one. Now, is this team ceiling higher with Zach McRoberts playing starters minutes, or with someone else taking over his spot in the rotation? So a lot of questions like that about the upcoming season, some good questions about Romeo, some questions about recruiting, and then kind of some fun questions at the end. But all of that coming here on this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink. Before we get to that, I want to say a few words about our sponsor, SeatGeek. As you know, buying tickets can be complicated and confusing, but there is a better way to do it, to buy tickets, and that is with SeatGeek, because SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets to every type of live event. Whether you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out with friends, or just need the perfect gift, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices. And best of all, it's all fully guaranteed. There is nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. It is by far the easiest way that I have found to shop for tickets because I can be anywhere, and with just a few taps, I can instantly find seats like I've done here in Dallas to watch Yogi play, although obviously I won't be able to do that now since he's no longer in Dallas, but concert tickets as a gift for my wife to go see other live events. So SeatGeek really makes it easy because they save you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals, and because it's all fully guaranteed. So best of all, listeners to Podcast on the Brink, you actually get $20 off of your first SeatGeek purchase. So all you need to do is download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K, today. That's promo code BRINK, and you will get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. And now, here's this week's mailbag episode. Alrighty, and the off-season continues to roll along here in late July. Alex, I was listening to the Ion College Basketball podcast last week with Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander, and Gary was talking about how they skipped doing an episode because, there just wasn't that much that was going on, not enough to talk about for another episode. And I'm thinking, man, it's like between this and the Assembly Call, I've been doing 2 episodes a week just on Indiana basketball. Come on, you guys can come up with something for all of college basketball when you have all those different teams at your disposal. But maybe just a sign of how crazy we are and this fan base is for talk about this Indiana team with so much anticipation for the upcoming season.
Yeah, we never lack for content here on the show. And as we've said, this is a 365-day a year, 24/7 passion for most of our listeners and readers. And so no weeks off for Podcast on the Brink, although we did take a couple weeks off earlier in the summer. That was just for vacation purposes. But yeah, I think the plan now is to just kind of be here every week for the foreseeable future as we move into the fall and into the winter.
Yep. So on that note, I want to get to this questioner from Swish, and I should mention, we're doing a mailbag episode this week, and all of the questions came from the Inside the Hall Premium Forum, and this, gives us a good opportunity, Alex, to just plug the Premium Forum, which I've mentioned before that everybody should sign up for. The URL for that is forum.insidethehall.com, correct? That's where people can go to if they want to join the best IU basketball conversation on the web.
Yes, sir. Okay. It's pretty incredible. Obviously, we're proud of the community that we've built over on the main site and also on the forum. There's just a lot of good discussion going on there. I'm active and involved there, but even I think more valuable than even what I'm able to contribute there is just we have so many people that have been there now for 5 or 6 years and have a lot of good insight and just a lot of fun, insightful conversations taking place there. So, yeah, it's not a big financial investment, obviously, just a little less than $3 a month, and it's a fun place to hang out online, and no trolling or any of that stuff. So in terms of internet communities, I think one of the better ones out there. I'm biased, obviously, but I think for the most part, people enjoy it and have a good time over there.
You can be biased and still be correct. It's okay.
Yeah, there you go.
So all of these questions come from the premium forum. So let's get right to them. And this comes from Swish. And he says, with the excitement of the upcoming season, what are the chances that this year's Hoosier Hysteria is at max capacity? And that's one of the, the big news items from the past week or so is the date for Hoosier Hysteria was announced. If you missed it, September 29th. Is the date when Hoosier Hysteria will be going on. That'll be that's pretty much as early as they could possibly have it, prior to the opening of the season. And there's a lot of anticipation for it. Alex, what do you think? I mean, obviously, the last few Hoosier Hysterias have been fun and they've been exciting. Hoosier Hysteria always is, but, hasn't quite been, a max capacity, just kind of blowout event like we've seen before. Is that what you're expecting this year, the second year of Archie Miller, Romeo Langford on hand, a lot of 5-star recruits going to be in the building, all the build up for this season kind of feels like things are leading to, pretty close to max capacity, if not all the way there.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly how many Hoosier Hysterias now I've been to in a row in terms of when I started going. The years are now starting to run together a little bit, but the only one I can remember that I've been to in recent history where it was full or close to it was the 2012-13 season.
Yeah,
I think we've talked about that before, and that was obviously the year after the Watt shot and the year that Indiana entered the season as the preseason number one. I think this year could rival or surpass that for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lot of excitement, obviously, regarding Archie Miller and the job he's done recruiting. And then just as you mentioned, the Romeo factor. As someone that went to a ton of New Albany games this past season and kind of saw the hoopla that surrounded Romeo and the New Albany team all of last year and the crowds that showed up, there's probably still a lot of people who are Indiana fans in the state that didn't get a chance to watch him play last year in person or get a chance to see him. And it's going to be tougher to get tickets this year to games. And so I think a lot of people who realize that may try to make it a priority this year more than others to get out to Hoosier Hysteria, show up, line up, kind of make it an all-afternoon event. I'm sure there's going to be early lines this year, more so in past years. And so I think it'll be really close. I don't know if it'll be completely full to the rafters, but I've already heard from a couple of people that ticket demand this year is going to be bumped up compared to what it was the past couple of years. And so I would expect that to kind of extend to Hoosier Hysteria and any other free events that Indiana decides to put on this fall.
On that Hoosier Hysteria note from Hoosier Stuck in Kentucky, does Justin Smith's vertical leaping ability make him the favorite to win the Hoosier Hysteria dunk contest? So if anybody missed this, this was posted on the IU basketball social media accounts, but Justin Smith had a vertical leap measured at 48 inches, which is astounding. I think that broke the school record, or at least the measured school record that Victor Oladipo had, which was 41 or 42, I think. And I mean, that is just, it's a remarkable number. And the video is really incredible. So I think to answer that question, yes, I think he has to be the favorite heading into the Hoosier Hysteria dunk contest. Who do you see being able to rival Justin with that, Alex? And then who's your all-time favorite Hoosier dunker?
Well, in terms of him being the favorite, yeah, he was probably the favorite last year too. And I want to say Curtis Jones won last year. I don't even remember. I'm pretty sure Curtis Jones won last year. There's been some odd winners over time. Like there was a year I think where that Hunter Mascara Perea was in it and probably should have won and didn't. I don't know if Oladipo won every year he was in it, but obviously if he were in one now, he would probably destroy the competition considering he's got a couple of NBA dunk contests under his belt. But yeah, I mean, I would put Justin as the favorite. Beyond that, it's in terms of athleticism, I mean, he's as good as it gets on the roster in terms of raw athleticism. I mean, if Romeo decided to get into it, I don't know if he will. I think he would have a chance. But beyond that, I mean, I would say it's Justin Smith's contest to lose. In terms of my most favorite dunker in IU history, wow, that's pretty. That's a pretty tough question. I remember Steve Hart being incredible.
That's the name I was thinking of too.
Yeah, I remember him being just a ridiculous athlete. In terms of in recent memory, Oladipo obviously had a couple dunks that everyone remembers. The 360 dunk in the Big Ten tournament game to cap off the win against Illinois. I think a lot of people remember that dunk. The almost alley-oop in the Michigan game that almost led to Assembly Hall kind of crumbling right before our eyes if it would have went in.
Yep.
And he had a couple dunks in that Kentucky game where it was like, man, this is a guy going up against the game at Assembly Hall, the watch shot game. There was a couple where he just kind of took it down the lane. I remember one that he just down and dunked on somebody that you're like, wow, this is a team full of pros, and he's going down the lane and dunking on people. He comes to mind. Cody Zeller wasn't the most, he was not a guy who threw down like anything crazy, but I used to just like to watch him run the floor and kind of glide in there for dunks on the break, just to see him get up and down the floor like he did. So in recent memory, I would say those are two of my more favorite guys. And then obviously I mentioned Steve Hart. It seemed like every time he would jump, he was still on his way up, even when he got up there to throw it down.
Yeah. In recent memory, Troy Williams, seeing him go streaking down the sidelines was amazing. Definitely have to give some love to OG Anunoby when he would take it from the top of the key and just explode down the lane on people. He did that against Michigan State, did it against Maryland. Those are some of the most ferocious dunks that we've ever seen. In terms of individual dunks, these guys weren't necessarily known as dunkers, but Tom Pritchard and Will Sheehy had a couple of just ridiculous dunks that were awesome. You mentioned Steve Hart, and there are obviously many others. But here's who I'm going with for my all-time favorite Hoosier dunker. Everybody's just going to roll their eyes. But I'm going with Calbert Cheaney. And I think this is actually an area where he's really underrated, was as a dunker, because he had just his ability to glide down the baseline and throw down really powerful jams was impressive. But he would also, I remember a couple of breakaways where he did like reverse double pump jams. And I always remember being kind of surprised because, he doesn't necessarily think of Calbert in that way, but he always made them. They were very powerful. And so, Greg Graham, obviously another great dunker from that team, but Calbert Cheaney is my all-time favorite player, but also my all-time favorite dunker because I think he's underrated as a guy who really used the dunk both effectively and stylistically. So he gets my vote, but there have been a lot of them.
That's a good one.
Okay, so I love this question, this next one. This is from Luby, probably my favorite question that was submitted, and I've been thinking about this ever since it came in. I still don't know that I have a good answer to it, but what's the story about IU hoops that you think people are overlooking now, but will become one of the top 5 stories of the 2018-2019 season? I think I've got my answer, but I'll let you go first.
Wow.
I know.
Why don't you go ahead and give yours, and then you've had a little chance to think about it. Let me think about it here for a second. Let me hear what you have to say first, and then I'll chime in.
So, number one, it's hard to think about an IU hoop story that people are overlooking because we've talked about seemingly all of them. So that was the first thing. I was trying to think, okay, what haven't we talked about? And then I'm going through it, and I've talked about that. So we've covered a lot of stories, but the way that I approach this question is there's a lot of optimism for the season. And so I think everybody is thinking about things from a positive standpoint. How much better Devontae can get, the breakout Justin Smith will have, how good the freshman will be, Jerome Hunter and how well he's apparently looking in practice, and Evan Fitzner and what he'll bring. So there's a lot of positives being talked about, and with good reason, because I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism. And so I think the stories that people are overlooking are the potential reasons why this year's team might not live up to its potentials, or potential kind of potholes that are coming that Archie's going to have to navigate around. And so I think when you look at the roster and you start thinking about the rotations, you start to pretty quickly realize that, oh my goodness, there are a lot of players, a lot of good players, a lot of talented players. And when you start shortening the rotation to 7, 8, or 9 guys, which is what you want to do by the end of the season, there's going to be some good players maybe not getting minutes. Because, first I was thinking, okay, well, maybe the thing people are overlooking is which one out of Race Thompson, Clifton Moore, and Jake Forrester really steps up and gets minutes. But then when you start looking at, you've got Devontae, you've got Al Durham, Romeo Langford, Rob Finnessy, Juwan Morgan, Zach McRoberts, Justin Smith, Jerome Hunter, Evan Fitzner, that you would easily pencil into any type of rotation, you're already at 9 guys. And that's without Duran maybe coming back and being healthy. So the thing I think people may be overlooking that could be a story as the season goes is when the rotation shortens, as it almost certainly will in Big Ten play, there are going to be some good players not getting the minutes that they probably deserve and maybe that they think they deserve. How does Archie navigate that to keep them bought in, to keep team chemistry high, and to make sure that everybody is moving in the same direction? So to me, I think that is, because that wasn't an issue last year by any means. There just weren't enough good players. Now that there are, how does Archie navigate that, and is he able to prevent that from becoming something that becomes a problem on this team internally?
That's a good one. I would say the one, after giving it a thought here for a minute, the one thing that I think people are maybe overlooking, they're looking obviously at the talent upgrade and the amount of players that are on the roster, but on this team, how many guys can you look to besides Juwan Morgan and Evan Fitzner and say these guys have legitimate postseason experience playing in big games that actually mean something? So my question would be, is the experience there for this team to make a run? I mean, obviously, talent gets you only so far, but you look at, with the exception of Kentucky and maybe a couple other programs that have done it with younger players in recent memory, most teams have several upperclassmen that have been kind of through the grind of seasons and going deep into the tournament previously. And you kind of look at some of the guys who are going to be playing a major role in this team: Romeo Langford, Devontae Green. You talked about Deron Davis earlier, Justin Smith. None of these guys have experience playing in meaningful postseason type games. So the talent, I think, gets you to a certain point, and then you have to kind of be able to execute. And so is IU going to have enough from a leadership perspective? Are Evan Fitzner and Juwan Morgan enough to get this team kind of where it ultimately wants to be? Because I know we'll talk more as the season approaches about expectations and, what's fair to expect from this team. How, is the Sweet 16 kind of what everyone's expecting? Do people want the team to go further? And you can really never say those things definitively. But I think if this is going to be a team that goes deep into the tournament, there's going to have to be really good upperclassmen leadership. I think that was something that was lacking at times last year with, in addition to the kind of the talent that wasn't there. I don't necessarily think you had great leadership on that team if you're getting beat by Indiana State and Fort Wayne at home soundly as they did. So I think that's the big question for me is the upperclassmen leadership going to be good enough for IU to reach its goals as a team? That's
a really good one. I like yours better. That's really good because my angle has been talked about some, but I think people really are overlooking the angle that you just talked about. So that was good. Hey, time to pay some bills real quick. So as usual, some of you are going to hear some ads inserted in right here. Others of you will jump right to the next part of our conversation where we will be talking about Zach McRoberts' role on next year's team and its impact on the ceiling for the 2018-19 team. Coming next. Next question from Madros. Is this Indiana team ceiling higher with Zach McRoberts playing starters minutes or with someone else taking over his spot in the rotation? What do you think, Alex?
I would say it's higher with someone else taking over from the standpoint of, I think Zach McRoberts, while he can do some things better offensively with another offseason of work, I'm not necessarily sure that he's going to take a huge leap forward. Can he be a guy that maybe scores 6 or 7 points a game and, knocks down the 3-point shot with some reliability? Yes, I think he obviously shot it pretty well last year from the perimeter. But, if Jerome Hunter or Justin Smith or Demezy Anderson or whoever, one of the newer guys is able to kind of give Indiana enough defensively to where the coaching staff is comfortable with that guy being on the floor, and that allows them to maybe play Zach McRoberts a little bit less. I'm not suggesting that he shouldn't play at all or he's not someone that belongs on the floor. I think he absolutely does deserve to have a role on next year's team. But I think what the other guys can maybe offer in terms of offensive upside is greater than what Zach McRoberts can offer from a defensive standpoint if the drop-off isn't too dramatic, with maybe, say, Jerome Hunter taking some of his minutes or Justin Smith or Demezy Anderson.
Yeah. I mean, the way this question is worded is really important because it says, is this Indiana team ceiling higher? Not, is Indiana better? I mean, those are two different answers. Is the ceiling higher? I think absolutely, because think about what it would mean for someone to take over his spot in the rotation. Given Archie Miller's clear affection for Zach and what he brings to the team, and his preference for guys that are going to defend, if someone takes over that spot in the rotation, they're really going to have to earn it. It's not just going to be because, they were a top 100 recruit and Zach McRoberts was a walk-on. Like, they're going to earn it and they're going to have to defend. And so, as you mentioned, if you can get someone with greater offensive ability to defend at or near the level of Zach McRoberts, you definitely raise the ceiling of your team. So, but I don't think that's a given that will happen. So we'll see, but it would definitely make the ceiling of the team higher if you can get other guys playing at close to that defensive level. That's going to help on both ends of the court.
Yeah, for sure.
From Hoosier and Chapel Hill, obviously Romeo is one, but who else on the current roster is likely to ultimately play in the NBA?
Off the top of my head, I would say Justin Smith is probably at the top of the list, just based on potential. I think Juwan Morgan has a chance, although I'm not sure. You always wonder with guys coming back for their senior year how much their stock can improve or where it goes from here. Now, we did see Yogi Ferrell kind of beat the odds and not get drafted, and now he's going into his third NBA season with a guaranteed contract. Those two guys for sure would kind of be near the top of my list, and I think Jerome Hunter down the line has a chance as well, but we haven't seen him enough, obviously, at this level to really evaluate. He's not someone that I view as maybe a one or two and done. I think he's going to be a guy that has to develop over time, but his ranking and just watching him play, the talent level there is apparent. So if he's a guy that develops, I think those are the three guys that really stick out to me as having the best chance of this group.
Yeah, I would agree with that. What's kind of ironic about this question is you just think back to last preseason, who was the highest ranked pro prospect on Indiana's roster? A guy that people probably wouldn't even consider for this question now. Do you remember who it was?
Clifton Moore.
Yeah. And, after a season of almost not playing at all, I can't imagine that his stock is still that high. But he's a guy you certainly wouldn't expect that, but clearly we're less than a year removed from people who are really smart about this stuff, seeing something in him to rank him that high. So it'll be interesting to see if he gets a chance to show himself and kind of rebuild that NBA stock. I wouldn't bet on it. But he's another name to at least think about because he's not that far removed from already being in those conversations.
Right. And you have to remember that was just the opinion of one person, albeit a person that's well respected in the industry. Jonathan Gavoni, I think of Draft Express, now of ESPN, was the one that saw Clifton Moore at the Jordan Brand regional game and kind of started the discussion of him maybe as an NBA guy, but he didn't really hear any other hype on him beyond that. So I don't think it's out of the question that he can develop and become a really good college player and maybe be a guy down the line that we're talking about as an NBA guy. But in a lot of ways, looking back on that whole thing, it was maybe a little bit too soon to be calling a guy who had never really played on one of the big circuits or ever played a minute of college basketball, a potential first round pick in the 2019 draft.
Yes, maybe just a little bit. Okay, so now we enter the Romeo portion of the show, and there are always several questions about Romeo. This first one, I feel like we've hit it before, so we can kind of hit it quickly, but I think it warrants touching on one more time. From Mark Kopic, what kind of season must Romeo have to convince future five-star recruits that Archie and staff can effectively utilize that level of talent? And I think it's important to remember that there's going to be a lot more that goes into the decision of five-star recruits more than just what kind of season does Romeo have. So you never want to place too much emphasis on it, but I certainly think a recruit, the profile of Romeo Langford, people really paid attention to the choice he made, and I think players will pay attention to the kind of season that he has. So what do you think needs to happen there for that to shine a positive light on Archie and the program?
I think more than anything, these recruits are just looking at what the opportunity is for a freshman to come in and make an impact, right? One of the knocks on Louisville under Rick Pitino was he would get these really highly ranked freshmen, and then he would kind of play mind games with them or bury them on the bench and not really give them a chance to go pro after 1 year. He would, he got some really good players at Louisville, and none of them really went the one and done route. And so I think a lot of guys are looking or will be looking not just at Indiana, but at other places. What kind of opportunities are there no one wants to be handed minutes necessarily, but people want to know coming into a school, is this a place I can go and make a huge impact as a first-year player? And I think this is a perfect situation for Indiana to showcase that with Romeo, because offensively they have, a huge gap to fill on the perimeter with shooting and a role that he can jump right into. So I think best-case scenario is, he comes in and one of the Big Ten leading scorers, goes pro after a year, has a really successful year. Indiana is successful as a team, and that's kind of maybe the blueprint for showing other recruits that Indiana can really be successful with the 5-star level kid.
Yep. Okay, this next question, another one from Madros, and actually several people submitted a question like this. And it's another reason why I wanted to address it, because it's kind of nonsensical, but it's also kind of humorous at the same time. So apparently there's some nonsense going around on some Purdue forums, and this, won't surprise anybody probably, but they're trying to downplay the potential impact of Romeo, talking about, how his stats weren't that good apparently in the EYBL against elite competition. He's only a mid-30s, 3-point shooter. So they're wondering if he's really going to be able to contribute the offensive punch that Indiana needs, if No Gel Eastern is going to be able to shut him down. But fortunately, the posters on the ITH forum kind of brought it around to a reasonable question. Do you think at all that Romeo's offensive potential as a freshman is being overplayed? Do you think he's going to struggle a little bit more than maybe people are letting on? Or do you think that the offensive prowess that he showed in high school is going to, for the most part, translate to him being a really productive player even as a freshman?
Yeah, I think he'll be really good from the beginning. Do I think he's necessarily going to come in and dominate every game from the get-go? No, there's very few guys that do that. But I think speaking with in almost certain terms, I would be surprised that if he comes in and averages anything less than 13 or 14 points a game, that to me is the floor for him. He's just too gifted of a talent, too gifted of a shooter and a scorer to not be able to put those type of numbers in the Big Ten from the get-go. So, I don't necessarily read into too much about what other fan bases are saying. He's I think the third or fourth highest rated Big Ten incoming recruit in the last, 10 or 11 years. The other two, I think, that were rated higher than him were Eric Gordon and Jared Solinger, and they had pretty good stints as freshmen in the Big Ten. So
pretty good.
I think people can expect a similar, maybe not, Eric Gordon numbers 20 a game, but I think to me the floor for Romeo next season is 13 or 14 points a game.
From Hoosier Stuck in Kentucky again, who will have the better NBA career, Victor, OG, or Romeo? It says Victor, or better can be defined however you want: championships, individual stats, all-star seasons. But what do you think? Just kind of gut feeling. Victor's obviously setting the bar pretty high already, making an all-NBA team. So if OG or Romeo can do that, they will have achieved something pretty significant.
Yeah, I would throw OG out of the discussion pretty quickly. I just don't necessarily see him being offensively good enough to even kind of be a warrant comparison to not Gordon, Victor or Romeo. As much as I like Romeo Langford, I'm not going to sit here and predict that he's going to be an NBA All-Star or a guy who gets a contract at the level that Victor Oladipo just did. I think there's a chance he could surpass what Victor's accomplished. I think a team that's going to draft him is probably that's going to be the expectation. But you just never know when a guy gets to the NBA, kind of what their role is going to be. You don't know if, who knows how his freshman season is going to go. Is he actually going to be a guy who does leave after 1 year? Is he going to be a guy that goes to the right situation? I think now in the NBA, it's so much is about fit and where you go. We saw that with Victor, right? He wasn't in a great spot in Orlando. Oklahoma City was probably better, obviously, for him than Orlando was, but he was never really going to get his chance to shine with Oklahoma City. Now that he's a Pacer, he's in a familiar spot, and he's able to kind of showcase his abilities to the best. It was funny. I was listening to Bill Simmons' podcast last week or the week before, and they were talking about the DeRozan trade for Kawhi Leonard, and they were actually saying, a couple of them on there were saying that they think Oladipo is a better player than DeMar DeRozan. Now, if we had that conversation, a year ago at this point, people would probably laugh at that. And now he's being talked about as a guy, maybe a top 15 player in the NBA. So I think that's a pretty high bar to set. I think Romeo could get there, but if you're asking me to kind of predict that he's going to be a better NBA player than Victor Oladipo, I'm not ready to go there yet.
The vast majority of listeners stopped listening after you suggested that there might be a chance Romeo doesn't go pro after 1 year.
Well, I mean, you never know, right? I mean, you never know how a season's going to play out. I think it's a pretty good possibility that he's going to be gone. But I mean, what if he underwhelms and his draft stock is not as high as what he would like? I mean, we've seen that happen with other guys. I'm not predicting that it's going to be the case, but I mean, do you disagree that it's kind of as we sit here today, asking me to predict that he's going to be a better NBA player than a guy who's right now probably considered one of the best 15 players in the league and just made, I think, all NBA second or third team. I mean, that to me, that's tough to do.
Yeah, no. I mean, the career that Victor has had already, I mean, he's setting the bar really high. I think what's interesting to think about with Romeo is there any scenario where he would come back for a second season that is actually a good thing for Indiana? Because that's easy to talk about. And obviously we'd love to have him for 4 years, but if you actually think about the reasons why he would come back for a second season, I guess you could make the case that he just, falls in love with Bloomington, falls in love with school, wants to do it a second year. Maybe there's unfinished business and he wants to win it all. I'm not saying any of those things are likely, but is there any kind of scenario where it's a good thing? Because like you just said, I mean, if he underwhelms, that's certainly not going to be a good thing for this season, and I don't think anybody is hoping for that, so that on the back end of it, you get a second year from him. So it's just kind of a question about managing expectations, I guess, for IU fans as you watch what's likely to be 1 year from Romeo.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think there's a scenario where I would call it a good thing, because I just think that all the information that I have and everyone I've talked to, the plan for him is if things go well and he's able to have the year that he wants, that he would probably move on after a year. So if he deviates from that, to me, it would suggest that something negative has transpired. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. The one thing I will say is I don't think he's going to be a guy that just comes in and is never unpacking his bags or is kind of has one foot out the door. I think he's going to be all in for the time that he's there, whether that be a year or two, whatever the case may be. But I don't really foresee, if you're asking me to foresee a scenario where he just wants to come back and he has a really good year, I don't necessarily see that being the case.
Yeah. All right, let's hit a couple of recruiting questions. And really for both of these, I'll refer folks back to our last episode with Jordan Wells because we kind of covered those there, but I just want to hit them real quick. From Josh Mofo 1, with DJ Carton off the board, which guard do you feel like is the priority for Archie to land? And obviously, you've got the two in-state guys, Armand Franklin and Brandon Newman, ranked around 100, but they're, in-state players. Indiana's got a good relationship with them. And then you've got some of the out-of-state guys that are ranked higher, maybe project as more instant impact players. Jamius Ramsey, Trey Mann, who reopened his recruiting, Anthony Harris, a lot of different names there. But you feel like those guys are less likely because they're not from the region and maybe you don't have the built-in relationship. So which one do you think, or who out of that mix do you think is the priority for Archie to land now with Carton off?
My opinion is that Brandon Newman is the guy that I'm looking at as being the most important, because I think he fills the role that IU most needs for next year. We've talked about DJ Carton before. To me, in a lot of ways, he was a luxury recruit for IU next season. They're still going to be pretty well set at point guard with Devontae Green and Robert Finney. Do you add a 5-star type point guard if you have the chance with a guy like DJ Carton? Absolutely, but I don't think it's a killer if he goes somewhere else. With Brandon Newman, what I see is a guy who's going to be able to come in and make a high percentage of perimeter shots right away. And assuming Romeo Langford leaves after 1 year, I think that's a role that Indiana's going to need to fill next year. They didn't have good shooting, obviously, last season. I think this year will be improved, but you can never have enough good shooting. And I think you make a good point about some of these out-of-state guys. We talked about that with Jordan last week. Until these guys that are from wherever they're from, whether it be the East Coast, West Coast, the South, until they actually step foot on campus and take a visit, I don't really consider them too serious in terms of their interest in IU. It's one thing to say something in an interview that you want to visit somewhere. It's another thing to actually step on campus and show that you're legitimately interested in a school. And so until that changes with a couple of these guys that we've talked about, I'm looking at Brandon Newman and Armand Franklin as the two most realistic, maybe, of those the guys that we've talked about. And also, and from a fit standpoint, I think Brandon Newman makes a little bit more sense just because he's a better shooter.
All right, and let's hit this one really quick from We'll Take Charge. How much of a threat is North Carolina to us landing Trace Jackson Davis? Maybe like on a scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you about him ultimately choosing North Carolina?
Yeah, it's weird. I've been getting some emails and direct messages on Twitter. Should be worried about Trace Jackson Davis. There's been some questions in the forum. We talked about this last week too. I think Trace Jackson Davis wants to be recruited. I don't think that means he doesn't want to go to Indiana. I think it means he's a 17 or 18-year-old kid who likes attention and maybe wants to take some visits and make sure that he's 100% set on his choice. I don't think there's a problem with that. I don't think there's any reason to be upset about it or feel anxious about it or nervous in any way. I just think that he's going to let the process play out. Now, I think we talked about this last week too. Now, if we get into next spring, it's late April and he hasn't committed to Indiana, then am I a little bit worried or ask him what's going on? Yes, but he's going to be there for Hoosier Hysteria, and I think it's going to be a night where Indiana has a chance to, the fan base has a chance to show him the love that he's looking for, and we'll see what happens after that. But in terms of a scale of 1 to 10 about North Carolina or any other school at this point, I would classify my number as 4 or under, probably a 2 or a 3 at the most.
And we always get this question, so just obligatory Deron Davis question. Have you heard or seen any updates on his progress as he recovers from the Achilles injury?
Just that video that IU posted a couple weeks ago. If people haven't had a chance to see that, I think you can go to the IU Athletics YouTube page and see. He seemed to be working out a little bit, moving around pretty well, but there's no reason to rush that with him at this point. I think it's going to be a slow process. I think it's a marathon, not a sprint. It doesn't really matter at this point what he's doing in terms of full contact or getting up down the court. At this point of the year, all that matters is he's getting 100% healthy and that he's getting in the best physical shape possible to be ready when the time comes for him to actually get out there and do the kind of the full workouts with his teammates. But at this point, I think they're continuing to take things slow. That's been Archie Miller's kind of message from the beginning, and I don't think anything's changed in that regard.
All right, a few miscellaneous questions here to end with. And this question, really, just one of my favorite questions that's ever come in on a mailbag from Gregory Spira. Can you think of any pertinent questions that haven't already been asked and answered 1,000 times in this never-ending, unrelentingly mundane off-season's many various mailbags and AMAs? That is true. That's a good question. So I thought about this one for a while, too, and thought about, Alex, since you're here, what I would really want to know from you that we haven't covered. And again, we've hit so many different angles about IU, so there's nothing specific about this team. But here's something I am curious about with you and that I think others might be as well. Because obviously, you were an Indiana fan and now this has become your job. And as I am even learning myself, now 7 years into this since we, launched the assembly call, sometimes as you start to do this and it becomes a commitment, you've got to create this content and it can start to feel at times more like a job than just the unbridled enthusiasm that you had for watching the games as a fan. Now I still maintain a lot of that enthusiasm for as a fan, but I'm wondering from your perspective, when was the last moment during an IU game that you just reacted naturally in the moment as a fan rather than as a reporter on the IU beat? Do you remember? Like just your natural, like you jumped up or you cheered, or it was just like, it was like a fan reaction more than, I need to make note of this to write about it, or, I can't do this because I'm sitting in media row, because those things can get in the way. But when was the last moment that your fandom just burst out of you in a moment, just naturally?
It's been a long, long time because, I don't do that obviously on press row, and I'm at most of the games. Now, have there been moments where I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is really good for the program. This is good for our business. This is good for, people coming to the website. Yes. Obviously the Romeo Langford recruitment, as the dog starts barking here in the background.
Dude, you totally staged this to get out of answering the question.
Actually, can I pause here and get this?
Yeah.
Control? Hold on.
Oh man, I don't know. Maybe we won't pause. I was thinking about this for myself because like I said, I definitely now kind of go through the game and I'm taking notes and I'm a lot more serious, but it still kind of pops out for me. The first moment that came to mind was in 2016 when Yogi Ferrell made the 3-pointer against Iowa. I remember just going bonkers when that happened. But even in subsequent seasons, like last year at the Iowa game, when Robert Johnson went on his 3-point barrage, that was just so fun to watch. And I was going nuts, typing on my notes, but then kind of looking up and cheering. And when Devontae Green made that pass to Freddie McSwain, because at that point, a lot of things still felt possible after that Iowa game. So it was a really exciting moment to kind of react. But that's why I was kind of curious about Alex's answer to this question, because I know that he's been at this longer. He's at more of the game, so there's more situations where he can't just kind of explode as a fan like you might normally. And obviously when it's your livelihood and you're thinking about, as he just mentioned, people going to the website and all those different things. There's a lot more there, kind of filtering your emotions than just watching the game as a fan. So that's why I'm curious to get his answer. And maybe he's back now.
I'm back now. I
didn't let you get out of it. I know you staged that to get out of answering the question. I'm not going to let it happen.
Apparently, this is our once every couple of months explosion from the dog in the background. But no, in all seriousness, I would say probably the moment that's most recent where I kind of felt like, wow, this is great. This is something I was actually rooting for, was when they beat Kentucky in the tournament, I think in 2016.
Oh yeah.
Just because of all the, obviously the back and forth between Kentucky and IU fans about the, where should they play? We don't need to play you. We should play you. It should be on home court. It should be on neutral court. And it's never a bad thing, obviously, when you're able to beat one of your rivals in a neutral court NCAA tournament game, a game that actually means something. So I would say that was the last time. But I was sitting behind Grant Hill and Jim Nance, so it's not like I can do anything besides kind of sit there and type on my laptop and just kind of keep my thoughts contained in my head.
And you're kind of a laid back guy, and you and I have never watched a sporting event together. Sometimes we need to just watch a White Sox game together. But I'm how does it normally come out of you when you're just a fan watching? Are you pretty laid back the entire time you're watching, or do you start clapping? Do you jump up and yell at the TV? Because I do all of those things, but you just naturally seem more laid back. So how does that come out for you naturally when it's not Indiana related to where you're more working? When you're just a fan, how do you respond?
There hasn't been anything worth cheering about with the White Sox in a while. Yeah. But when that 2005 run, you can ask my wife. That was actually, we started dating the beginning of 2005. So
wow.
She always likes to joke and say that I met her and then the White Sox won the World Series. But really since 2008, I think was the last time I went to a playoff game. But with the White Sox, when they're good and I'm engaged, and obviously I haven't had as much time to dedicate to watching their games. With me kind of taking over this full time, and this is kind of all I do. So I'm really focused on IU. But I used to be a person that would kind of pace with every pitch, whether I'm watching it at home or if I'm at the game. I couldn't really sit still. Maybe go walk around the concourse, and the bigger the moment, the more nervous I got. I can remember even Game 4 of the 2005 World Series. I think I went and watched it with a couple of friends at Buffalo Wild Wings, and I was still kind of hanging on to every moment with each pitch. And so that's kind of how, I do show a little emotion when it comes to the White Sox, just because I've been following them so long. And, that was obviously kind of the top of the mountain for us White Sox fans, 2005. Hopefully they get back to that point down the road. But, that's really kind of the only time I would really show emotion as a fan or kind of show any nerves with IU stuff. I try to remain professional at all times as best as I can.
God, 2005 feels like so long ago now.
I know.
Holy smokes. All right. Maybe one final question here. This is from Coop There It Is, which is a great forum name. Do you foresee IU hosting a media member scrimmage like in the past ever again? And if so, who is the best media member baller?
I don't, that was a Tom Green thing, so I don't necessarily think it's going to happen again. It would be funny to kind of have a new version of it.
What year did that happen?
There were some guys from the TV stations in Indy, and I don't know all their names, that were pretty decent. I want to say, I know 2010 or 11 or 12. I think there was like a stretch of 2 or 3 years in a row where they had it every year. I can just remember being like so sore the day after that I was like, I'm never doing this again. There was a lot of high volume, low efficiency shooters in those games, as you might expect.
Yes,
a lot of tweaked hamstrings. I can't really remember though anybody being like a stud in the media shootouts. So, like I said, there was a couple of TV guys from Indy, but some of them have moved on now that were pretty good. If they had a version of it now, I'd say probably some of the students would be the best because they're the most in shape.
Oh yeah,
and they're the youngest. They can get up and down a little bit. I mean, some of us older guys, there's probably 3 or 4 possessions up and down the court, and we're kind of gassed and looking for oxygen or a drink of water or something. And so the younger guys, I can even remember back in those early those older media challenges, some of the students being the best, but there was no one out there that dominated or anyone that you looked at and said, wow, that guy's really good. It was mostly just a bunch of us making a fool of ourselves and having fun for the most part. Pete DePremio, I remember him kind of being the most in shape of the older guys. Obviously,
yeah.
He's built like a rock, and I think he even carried somebody up the stairs in the football stadium when they did it one year on his back.
Oh wow!
They did some kind of physical challenge type things on the field, and I think he carried Dustin DePirac on his back up the Memorial Stadium steps. I remember seeing a video or a picture of that. But beyond that, it was.
And that was pre.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say that was pre Doyle, right? So if Doyle was there, he'd be in pretty decent. He'd be able to throw down
stuff. If it was like a,
he'd be like Freddie McSwain.
Yeah, if it was like combine type testing, I think Doyle would do pretty good. Because isn't he an MMA guy or he used to do MMA fights or something? He's not a guy I would want to mess with.
No, not at all. All right, well, look at that. We were aiming for 45 minutes, and we're right at 45 minutes, so that was perfect. Thank you all, again, in the premium forum for your questions. I know we couldn't get to them all, and there were some other ones that were really good that we didn't get a chance to get to, but we'll probably do at least 1 or 2 more of these mailbags before the season starts. These always seem to be popular episodes, so we like to do them, and it ensures that we cover the topics that you really want us to cover. But over the next few weeks, we'll have some more interviews. We're definitely going to, ramp up our off-season look around the Big Ten. We always try to do that every off-season, bring in beat writers from the other teams and, try and get a little preview for what Indiana's Big Ten competition will be. So you can be on the lookout for all of those episodes and then and recruiting updates as they are necessary. Hopefully we get a commitment or two here or there, and we have reason to talk about those guys. So that's what's coming on Podcast on the Brink, but we always appreciate your questions. We appreciate your feedback. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate you sharing. And we just appreciate you being here, and we look forward to continuing to talk IU basketball throughout the offseason and then into the season with you.
Yeah, and don't forget to like or subscribe, whatever it is these days on the various podcast platforms. I think on Apple Podcasts, if you subscribe, leave us a review, leave us a rating. I think that's helpful for us as we try to grow the show. And also, I may have mentioned this last week. I mentioned it a couple times on Twitter and different social media that the show is now available on Spotify. So if you're a Spotify user like I am, you can now subscribe to Podcast on the Brink on Spotify. So it's an easier way. I know I manage like all my music that I like to stream through Spotify, so it's easy for me now to kind of switch back and forth. I used to have to switch between Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Now I got everything in one place, so that's nice to have. So check us out on Spotify if you haven't done that.
Absolutely. And we will be back next week with another brand new episode. Until then, take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. To get more from me and from Alex, visit assemblycall.com and insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana University basketball. If you liked this episode, please consider sharing it with a friend or family member who loves IU basketball as much as you do. You can also support the show by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, which helps us get the word out to more IU fans like yourself. We will be back next week with a new episode. Until then, as always, go Hoosiers.